Welcome. Welcome back to Righteous Minds. We are Righteous Minds where we are tending the mind
And
and nurturing
nurturing
the
the
soul.
soul.
Well, welcome back, guys. We are so excited that you're coming back and hanging out with us again. We have started the hot topics that you guys had said that you were interested in hearing. We did self-care and now we want to do self-care part two. Last session we were really kind of just talking about self-care and people's perspective of self-care and even in religious communities this the perspective of self-care. But we want to dig in a little bit more about self-care and its importance and the different aspects of it, as well as our goal is to leave you with some suggestive things to do for your self care. So, with that being said, we are going to get my little sister, Melissa, who's going to kick us off talking about.
That
Stop
was cheesy.
laughing.
That was cheesy. I know. I
Listen,
was
you know what? Listen, I didn't told y'all, like, she's the serious one. Like, I'm the one who people be like raising an eyebrow, like, but again, okay, so I'm not gonna be cheesy. Introducing.
no, I'm saying I was cheesy with my dance moves, not you.
Oh,
I was doing like that. I wasn't saying you were being cheesy. I'm
I
saying I
kind of
was
was
being
though.
cheesy.
I kind of was being cheesy though. But we're gonna start with Melissa right now. She's gonna take us down the path of self care.
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics. As a mental health professional, I love talking to clients about self care um, and coping skills, relaxation skills. We know that those are very common things that you talk to people about. But sometimes when you throw in self care, it's always interesting to me when I find that people they know about it, but they don't know about it.
Mhm.
So what they know about it is what we talked about last time, what the media says self-care is. So people are usually very familiar with getting pedicures and manicures and those types of things. But when you actually start to kind of assess them in terms of the different areas of self-care, then a lot of times they're very, they just haven't heard of that.
Mhm.
So one of the ways that I kind of preface it when I talk to clients is just to kind of maybe just ask them what they know,
Mhm.
and then to kind of let them know that it is a way for you to prioritize yourself. It is the activities, the behaviors, the attitudes that you have towards yourself that promote wellness and well-being. And there's information out there. You could probably go to any type of CDC or health organization website, and they will have something called the 8 dimensions of wellness.
Mhm.
And on the 8 dimensions of wellness, what they talk about is these different areas of well being that very closely mimic the different areas of self care. So, what I want to do is talk about those different areas of self care. And it's going to make a lot of sense. And then, like Regina said, we're going to talk about some practical things. So, one area of self care that I talk to people about is physical. And clearly, that has to do with how you care for your body, and the behaviors and actions that you take in terms of being well physically. Obviously, that would mean things like diet, exercise, sleep would probably be in that category. And just your overall personal hygiene would even fit into that category. Because when you're working with people who have mental health issues, sometimes personal hygiene can be very challenging for them. I have many clients that I work with that don't take baths regularly. They don't eat regularly, and so to talk about physical self care is very beneficial to them. Another domain is our social, and this has to do with how we connect with other people and how we build relationships. So when I talk to people about social self care, I'm talking to them about, do they have hobbies? Do they have uh, activities that they enjoy participating in? Do they play? Believe it or not, play is very meaningful and very valuable for adults. We can forget about play when we're not kids anymore, but as adults, we need to have a healthy form of play. And when you're working with people who have things like anxiety and depression that they're dealing with, oftentimes it's very difficult for them to engage in social activities, especially if they have social anxiety or if
Mm,
they have depression, and they're isolating and they're withdrawn. It would be very difficult for them to engage in social self care. So it's important to talk about that with that population, and everybody for that matter. There is intellectual self care. So this has to do with your mental, um, your mind. So I like to talk to people about how do they expand their perspective on things.
mm,
How do they increase their curiosity? Curiosity is very powerful because it allows your mind to expand. It allows your thinking to expand when you get curious about things. So that's a domain that we often talk about. Vocational self care has to do with your work behaviors. How do you approach your work? Are you doing work that you feel is meaningful and valuable? Um, is your work allowing for you to utilize your gifts and your talents? And so, do you have a work life balance that allows for you to be healthy while you're working? And like I mentioned before, I have 3 jobs. So it's very important for me to be mindful of how I handle my vocational self care.
mhm,
Spiritual self care, that seems the most obvious, but that has to do with how you are taking care of yourself from a spiritual standpoint. And it's not just the religious components of being spiritual, but it is also about nature. It's also about self reflection. It's also about making sure that you're becoming a better version of yourself
mm,
each day. So that has to do with spiritual self care. And then the last domain that I like to talk to people about when it comes to self care is emotional self care, which has to do with how you express yourself from an
mm.
emotional standpoint.
Okay.
So this includes a lot of things like, do are you able to self regulate? Are you able to talk to people about things that are upsetting to you or that you feel are a problem for you?
Mhm.
Um, are you able to be vulnerable? We've used that word quite a bit on this podcast. It's important to be able to be vulnerable, um,
Amen.
to know that. Your vulnerability is not going to create feelings where you are being judged or you are being looked at in a certain way. And so it's important to have those conversations. And again, from the mental health standpoint, when I am working with people who are dealing with mental health issues,
Mhm,
anxiety, depression, um, these areas become a real challenge for them.
mhm,
Because as I mentioned earlier, many times they're dealing with isolation. Many
mhm,
times they're dealing with self doubts. They don't feel good about themselves. Many times they're dealing with trust issues that cause them to not feel comfortable being around people, and building those social connections. A lot of times they have um, concerns or fears around doing things that they've never done before.
mhm,
So a lot of times it's very challenging for people that have that are dealing with anxiety and depression to feel confident or to feel courageous enough to do something they've never done before. Much of their life they can spend trying to control things and
mm,
trying to make sure that they're not experiencing something that they are not already prepared for, especially people that have anxiety. And a very common behavior with people who experience anxiety and depression is avoidance.
mm,
And so, one of the ways that I want to help them to manage avoidance or even to prevent avoidance is by talking about self care,
mhm,
getting them to buy into the importance of them treating themselves with care, treating themselves with love, treating themselves with kindness that will allow them to feel more equipped and more
mhm,
capable of being in situations that they can't control. Because ultimately, that's what the goal of therapy is to help people recognize the limits of their control and then to be able to still function in a meaningful way.
Mhm.
One of the things that I like to talk to people is about their values as well. That
Okay.
if you have identified things that are important to you, then your tendency to function in alignment with those things is
Mhm.
much higher than if you don't know what's important to you in life. And so a lot of times just talking to people about their values and saying, you know,
Mhm.
what matters to you? What is important to you in relationships? What's important to you in your job? What's important to you in terms of your body? What's important to you in terms of your mind? What's important to you spiritually? And when people can identify what's important to them and they are aligning their actions to those values, they're
Mhm.
more likely to engage in the things that make their life more meaningful.
Mm.
And so that's where I go into self care is self compassion in action. You treat yourself differently when you care for yourself differently. You treat yourself differently when you are responding to the pain and the suffering that you're going through with compassion. You're not
Mhm.
responding to it with criticism and judgment, but you're responding to it with compassion.
Mhm.
And so I enjoy talking about self care with my clients. I like seeing their faces light up when they hear something that they haven't heard before and they're like, oh my goodness. And then what I start to do after we kind of figure out where they are in terms of what the things are that they are practicing as far as self care and what are the things that they would like to start practicing. And
Okay.
once they've identified the things that they are not practicing as much, but they would like to, then we talk about a goal. And I say that let's set a self care goal and let's make it as achievable as we possibly can because the goal is for you to be successful at this. And really, the only way that you could fail at self care is when you don't practice it. um, because once you make it about being the most important thing to you, you will engage in it. You will find ways to engage in it. And so I will tell them, you know, what's something that you can do? What's the smallest step that you can take? And it really has to be small steps because, again, like we talked about last time, everybody has a different perspective of what self care is. And
Mhm.
when you're working with people who view it from the standpoint of I'm being selfish or, you know, I'm creating something in myself that I'm not going to like later on or whatever the case might be, then you have to approach it with a lot of uh, patience
Mhm. Okay.
and really approach it with letting them know, you know, what's the smallest thing that you would be willing to do in this area. You know, if you're saying that you're not somebody that's going to exercise, then are you someone that would at least move your body? And if you would move your body, what is something that you would be able to move? Because you may have pain in your knees, or you may not be able to get on the treadmill or go to the gym or something like that. You know, because again, when people are experiencing mental health issues, the challenge sometimes is helping them to see what's possible, right?
Mhm.
A lot of
Mhm.
times it's just very difficult for them to see what's possible, and they're going to shoot it down and they're going to shoot it down. And I just have to always be ready to go, okay, but what is possible for you? I'm not
Right.
talking about you doing it the way I would do it or you doing it the way your best friend would do it. No, how could you possibly do it that would be achievable and doable for you? And so we'll have those conversations and people will throw up, well, you know, I'm just gonna do it like this. And it's like, okay, but I don't want you to be extreme with it. Okay. I
Mhm.
don't want you to set a goal that's not going to be realistic for you. So
Mhm.
let's think about what's realistic for you. And then let's think about what might some of the challenges be to you actually doing it. Because we have to think about that. There's
Right.
always going to be situations and circumstances that come up that are going to challenge your ability to practice self care. And so we have to talk about that. You know, if you get some bad news or if something happens at work, how are you still going to make sure that you eat? How are you still going to make sure? And I will say, you know, you may need to set a reminder in your phone, eat something. Um, how are you going to make sure that you get enough sleep? It may be that you get off of your cell phone. decrease your screen time, do a different activity before bed than what you're used to doing. So, I always try to prepare them for the challenges so that they can have a strategy when the
Mhm.
challenge comes. Because a lot of times when people are dealing with mental health, it's them not being prepared for something going wrong, as I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, and then the
Okay.
tendency to just avoid it. I'm just going to avoid this altogether because it's not going to work out anyway. And so it's important to help them prepare for the challenge as well
Mhm.
as the success.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
good. Let me ask a question. So you went over multiple domains or dimensions
Hmm.
um for self-care. So let me ask you a question. So what about the one as far as social self-care? I never even thought about it like that. As being self-care, and it kinda is because
Yeah.
there are times where if you're in a bad like, so me, oftentimes in the past when I've just been in a bad place, or I'm struggling with something or say for instance, I was involved with someone, I just wouldn't let them go, and I just keep dealing with it, and I don't wanna keep talking to people about it, so I just stay to
Hmm.
myself. But I
Hmm.
do find that sometimes when I would then reemerge or I would get involved or I would interact with a friend or whatever, it is like I don't know, it is really good. And so I had never thought of um, social self-care that basically you're saying and even the thing about what you said having fun,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
never thought of it like that. So how would
Right.
you person who so what tip or suggestion would you give a person who, let's say they are in the throes of depression, and they
Hmm.
usually are a social person and they're not?
Hmm.
Would you encourage them to try to do something that they're usually that's something they usually do?
Absolutely, I sure would.
Mhm.
There is a technique in therapy. I can't remember the modality, but where you do the opposite of what you feel. I believe it's dialectical behavior therapy that technique is in, but it really just basically says you do the opposite of how you feel, and eventually you will start to feel how you're supposed to feel by doing the behavior, if that makes sense.
Wow.
So it basically just says do the opposite of the emotion. And, we know from a spiritual standpoint, which I'm looking forward to you getting into, that we can't go by our feelings, right?
Right.
Our feelings can be fleeting.
Mhm.
Actually, the amount of time that a feeling lasts is about a split second. So your feeling is going to change pretty quick.
Mhm.
It does not
Mhm.
stick around very long. And
Mhm.
so because our feelings are so fleeting, they cannot be trusted all the time.
Mhm.
But at the same time, because you're dealing, because I know that if I'm working with somebody with depression, most
Mhm.
likely they have a lack of motivation and they have
Mhm.
low energy. Those are just symptoms of depression, lack of motivation and low energy, on
Right.
top of them feeling hopeless. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
hopelessness. And so, in order for us to break through that, you have to be able to engage in things that actually bring meaning to life.
Mhm.
Their tendency is to engage in things that create more of the depression, right? The isolating and the withdrawing. So, what I have to do is talk to them about, you're actually going to start to feel better when you actually start to change your behaviors. So, we go through this thing called the cognitive triangle. And the cognitive triangle just basically says our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all interconnected. So
Mhm.
so usually the way it works in the triangle is the thought comes first.
Okay.
And then usually there's an emotion and a behavior that follows. So once I educate clients on this cognitive triangle, this process that happens for all of us, that is not unique to you because you're dealing with depression, it's not unique to anybody. It is what happens to all of us. We are
Mhm.
thinking, feeling, and doing beings.
Mhm.
Thinking, feeling, and doing, thinking, feeling, and doing constantly. And
Okay.
so, what I educate them on is once you change what you're thinking, your feeling and doing is going to automatically change.
Okay.
So, I walk them through some specific scenarios just to kind of gauge their interaction and go, okay, let's say I walked in a room and everybody stopped and started looking at me. And I give them this scenario. I say, what do
Mhm.
you think would be some of your thoughts if that were you? You walked into a room and everybody stopped talking. And then they'll say things like, well, they probably were wondering who I was, or they probably thought that I was, so they'll give me some little thoughts that they're having in that particular situation. I say, well, how would you feel? And then they'll say embarrassed, they'll say scared, and different things like that. And I say, well, what would you do if you thought that and you felt embarrassed or whatever? And then they'll say, I would walk back out the room, or they'll tell me what they would do. And so
Mhm.
I say to them, okay, that's one way to handle that situation. That's one response that you would have to that thought and those feelings. I said, but
Mhm.
let's look at it a different way. And
I got one
so
for you.
go ahead. So as they go through those types of scenarios on the cognitive
Mhm.
triangle, they come to recognize that what you're feeling started with a thought. So what
Mm.
we have to tackle is the thought.
Is the thought.
And
So
it's
what
going to,
so what you saying do the opposite of
yeah,
what you're feeling? So
do the opposite.
I would probably say, "Well, the party don't start till I walk in."
Yep. And I've had clients say that. I've had clients say that. And I say to them, you know what? That's awesome. Especially if you're somebody that deals with social anxiety,
Right,
or you're
right.
somebody that is so afraid of what people are thinking about you or how they're perceiving you, you being able to do that. Now, of course, this is not an overnight thing. It takes
Mhm,
time for people to get to that point, but it's you helping them to bring an awareness to how little influence feelings actually have on them, because a
wow.
lot of it is how they're feeling. Like, I just feel this way, right? Or, I'm sorry, thinking, yes, and how they're thinking. And so you really just are exposing this confusion that people have, where they believe what's in their own head.
Mhm.
And who does it? I mean, there's been a lot of situations in my life where I believed everything that I thought,
Mm,
and I
yep.
believed it, and you could not challenge me. I was like, it's in my head, it's what I think. You ain't gonna tell me nothing else. And I would be firm, like, what do you say, 10
10 toes
toes
down.
down, 10 toes down about something that was in my own head,
Mhm.
and my perception being off because of my own experiences. So your perceptions are always going to be colored by your own unique experiences.
Which I'm gonna say this isn't self-care, but even you talking about that, because the word of God says, "Whatsoever a man thinketh, so is he." So, because you're adamant, this is what I'm listen.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right.
Yep. Yep.
Can I have another question?
Yes, ma'am.
So because this is interesting to me too. Vocational self-care. Like, so how do you have vocational self-care? Like, say for instance, if you're working in a job that you don't like
Hmm.
how do you have how is that possible?
So you find, again, you have a work life balance as much as you can. And that's a
Mhm,
struggle for me at times. I'm not going to lie. But you find ways to grow. You know,
mhm,
growth is one of those things that should be endless in all of our lives, right? And we should always be operating from a growth mindset, that even
right.
though you may be in a situation where you feel you know more, and I am in a leadership position at one of my jobs, and I've done this job for many years. I probably could do it with, I probably could just do it without thinking about it. And when you're in that place, then the work is no longer enjoyable, right? Because you
Mhm,
already know everything. You already know the answer to everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, you've done it for so long, it's become muscle memory more than anything.
mhm,
But I think for me, I constantly find ways to expand my knowledge in that particular field or in that particular job. I spend a lot of time trying to build up the people that I supervise. So I invest in the people that I'm supervising, because I know I'm not going to be here forever. But
mhm,
I also want this work to continue. You see what I'm
mhm,
saying? So I invest. I spend a lot of time talking with my team about how they can grow, how they can continue to expand their
mhm,
knowledge.
mhm,
I do a lot of advocating. So even sometimes just advocating for people, advocating for better pay, or advocating for better opportunities for people, is a great way to kind of get you back on fire about what
mhm.
you maybe have grown tired of, and has lost have it's just not as interesting to you.
That's
But I think, but so yeah, just constantly looking for opportunities for growth.
that's good. Oh, okay, I like that. Okay, So, was there any more, Miss,
No, I
Claire,
think that's it. I think that's all I got. Well, actually, what I wanted to say, let me say this:
okay.
many of us have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
I no, I
and
haven't. What is it?
oh,
Is
okay,
Maslow's?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and basically, he was well known. I think he was a psychologist, a sociologist. I can't quite
Mhm,
remember, but he created this hierarchy of needs. And
okay.
basically what his foundation was is that we have these more basic needs that have to be met, and then
Mhm.
as we go up in those needs, then we get to this thing called self-actualization. And
Oh,
self actualization just basically says you're being the best version of yourself that you can be, right?
mhm,
But it
okay.
starts with you making sure that you have your basic needs met, and then making sure that your once your basic needs are met, then hopefully that then your safety needs are being met. And so your safety needs get met, and then you keep going up. Now you're involved in love and belongingness, and those needs get met, and then you go from love and belongingness to esteem, feeling good about yourself,
Mhm.
knowing what your strengths are, and all of that. And then you get to the place where you actually reach self actualization. So I like to think about self care as kind of being all encompassing of that. That every day we should be engaging in activities that
Mhm.
move us up to being the best version of ourselves that we can be, or a better version of ourselves that we can be. Um, so that's kind of how I think about it.
I like that. I okay, and you're right. I have heard of Maslow's.
I knew you did. I was like, she's heard of this.
But I was like, "What?" No, but no, you're right, you're right. As soon as you said self-act, I'm like, "Oh, okay, okay. My bad, my bad, my bad." Alright.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when I think about self-care, I think I do appreciate those areas that you mentioned. You said physical, you said social, you said vocational, you said intellectual, and what was the other one you said? Um
Spiritual, or yeah,
Spiritual.
spiritual
Yep,
and
yep,
emotional.
and emotional, yep.
Yep.
Um, so those are different areas that we can because what's great about it is that ultimately it's saying even if you don't do all areas, if we begin to do one area at a time, that's still us trying to take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest thing is that, and like I said, from the our last time together, even though those in spiritual places may feel like they may have their own um, perceptions about engaging in self care, that it seems as though you're being selfish. No, you're not being selfish. You're doing the work so that you can then be able to serve others. So I really
Mm-hmm.
want to encourage that as you begin to ponder, he said, that you shouldn't be focused on yourself, take up your cross and all that type of stuff. But the fact of
Mm-hmm.
the matter is that if we can't be able to even do ministry effectively if we are not well ourselves. And the
Mm-hmm.
message is always for the messenger first. One thing I wanted to share, the scripture that, in Ephesians 2:10, and he talks about we are his workmanship. So if we are his workmanship, yes, we still should be doing that work for us. And also, just a reminder of the instances in which Jesus himself exhibited the importance of self-care, the times when he would be with the multitudes and then he would step away to go and pray. So
Mm-hmm.
it is, I guess I want to just reiterate that to those who may have, um, you know, you know, kind of some skewed perspectives about the idea of a believer actually investing or considering self-care because I actually came across some more articles in which you
Mm-hmm.
know um, the pers- the position is that, oh, people, they just want to go out there and, me, 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 and that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that at all. What we're saying is that in our journey we have to also take time to replenish. We have to take time to restore, revitalize ourselves. And these different areas that you shared are good, um I think, good tangible
Yeah.
methods or different areas in which we can begin to do that spiritual the self-care. Um a couple of things I wanted to just kind of point out that self-love, we have to love ourselves. I mean, the word of God says, he says, love thy neighbor what? As
Yes.
thyself. And
Yes.
the fact that he said that to love your neighbor as like he's saying you gotta love you because reality is that literally if you're not
Hmm.
loving you, you can't love your neighbor because he's telling you to
Absolutely.
love your neighbor like you love you. And the
Absolutely.
reality, there's many of us who are not loving ourselves. Um, and so definitely I really want to encourage and because when you begin to love yourself, you know you have to take care of yourself.
Hmm.
Definitely even the physical. If we think about, our unhealthy diets, doing things that are, we know are whether it's putting things in our bodies that is definitely unhealthy, that's not caring for us. That's not self-care of even our physical body.
Right.
But I definitely wanna drive home the fact that you have to love yourself, and many of us don't love ourselves. So, and when we love ourselves, it begins to go hand in hand with the idea of actually taking care of ourselves. Um, and the other thing is that, when you say when you go into the space of, depression and things like that, which will contribute to you not wanting to take care of yourself because you are
Hmm.
in that space, I like the fact that you said that, even the social self-care part, that's a means by which, ultimately you're also working taking steps moving from that bad space that you're in. And again,
Hmm.
it's because you don't initially you're probably not thinking of it that you're taking care of yourself, but ultimately that's what you are by moving from that space and like you said, doing the opposite of what you feel.
Hmm.
So I really appreciate those domains and things that you mentioned. I did want to kind of just share that it was a couple things I came across of let me see, self-love. So self-love means taking care of your own needs and not sacrificing your well-being for others. I'm gonna say that
Mm.
again.
Yeah.
Self-love means taking care of your own needs, not being selfish. It's just saying taking care of your own needs and not sacrificing your well-being for others. Settling self-love means not settling for less than you deserve, and I know I've
Hmm.
been guilty of that,
Me
settling
too.
for less than what we deserve, so we definitely want to, think about the fact that remember, Jesus, that was in the red letters.
When it's in the red letters, you know he
That's
mean business.
Jesus is talking, okay? But I know that Melissa was gonna talk about some other means of self-care. But again, remember when we're talking about self-care, we're not talking about how we trying to bolster or help the
Right.
multi-billion dollar self-care industry. That's not what
Right.
we're saying. We're saying that you are important, you are
Hmm.
valuable. I just said the scripture said in Ephesians 2 that you are God's workmanship, you are his temple. So you want to, it's imperative that you take care of yourself. And that's how you show other people you love yourself.
Absolutely.
Because real talk, when we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not loving ourselves. Where we look like we're not taking care of ourselves, what we're
Hmm.
looking like is we don't love ourselves. And the
Right.
reality is, how can we attract someone to love us when we don't love us?
Mm. Uh-oh.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, seriously speaking, we have to. But a couple of things I would just kind of want to say about when we don't show when we it says 10 signs that you lack self-love. And I'm sharing this because I'm hoping that if you any of these
Hmm.
signs, you recognize them as something that you've been in a space. I'm sharing these because I'm hoping that okay, I need to love myself so that I can begin to practice and work on self-caring for myself. And they said 10 signs you lack self-love, perfectionism.
Mm.
It's perfectionism is a sign of lack of self-love because you wanna make sure everything is perfect because,
Yes.
oh my goodness, because I mean, I think, yeah, you might be concerned about judging other people judging you, but you might be more concerned about you judging your own self critically, the inner critic.
Correct. Hmm.
Uh, Melissa talked about, previously, the inner critic. Um,
Hmm.
Avoidance of self-care and neglect of personal needs. Let me say it again. A sign that you lack self-love is avoidance of self-care and neglect of personal needs. A sign of lack of self-love is tolerating toxic or abusive relationship. When you're in those situations, you're not spending time taking care of yourself either. Okay?
Hmm.
It says difficulty to saying no and overcommitting when these are again a sign that you are showing that you don't
Right.
love yourself.
Hmm.
Comparing self unfavorably to others. Many of
Mm.
us do, yes, that is a sign of self that you're not
That's a
showing that
good
you
one.
love yourself.
That's a good
Another
one.
one is difficulty setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, which I'm excited. I'm just want to let y'all know coming soon to Righteous Mind podcast near you is healthy
Yes.
boundaries. So we're excited. We're gonna be talking about that. But that's a sign that you are not loving yourself. Another
Hmm.
sign is engaging in sabotaging behavior.
Ooh.
That says that
Ooh.
you
That's
lack
a good one.
self-love. Yes.
Hmm.
And then the number 10 is a chronic feeling of inadequacy or low self-esteem. That's a sign
Hmm.
that you're not. And here, friends, if we are exhibiting any of these behaviors, especially a bunch of them, all for a long extended time,
Hmm.
we need to step back because we're saying we don't love ourselves. And if we don't love ourselves, we're not going to take the time to do self care. And you all said self care is important, and we know it is. So that's why we're
Yeah.
talking about it. And it's highly probable we're going to circle back to self care
Yeah.
because just like Jesus, like in the Bible, God says things in different places in the Bible because we don't remember.
Right.
We need to keep being reminded.
Repetition. Repetition.
Repetition. So, I imagine we're gonna come back and be talking about self-care
Hmm.
again in the very near future. But those my few things that I just kind of really want to share about about self-care, but even the fact that if we don't love ourselves, we can't even practice self-care. So if any of those signs that I shared with you, if you're like, oh, you know what, that's okay. It's fine. We can work on that. It's time for us to begin and be like, you know what, you know what? I'm not gonna tolerate a toxic or abusive relationship because I love
Hmm.
myself.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. And let me just say, a lot of those things are so subtle, right? Because if
mhm,
they were much more, if they weren't subtle, then we would all recognize them pretty easily.
true.
There was a couple that you were saying, and I was like, but comparison, how
Mhm.
subtle is that, and how easy does that show up? And I would dare say that it shows up in religious spaces and in religious communities,
That's true.
and maybe something for us to talk about. But I
Yeah.
think that it's not always easy to recognize these things in ourselves. And of course, you have to have a level of self reflection, and a level of openness and willingness to be honest. That you may be somebody. I know, we talked about it. I know for many years I had a very difficult time saying no, and I have been a perfectionist. And there is a benefit that comes out of being a perfectionist that almost can make you think that you're not being a perfectionist, that you're just good,
Mm.
you're just good at everything that you do. My goodness, I never mess up. Oh, get out of here with those mistakes. And so it's so easy. It can be so subtle that you don't
Mhm.
notice it, that
Wow.
you are allowing certain things, you're allowing yourself to engage in certain relationships with people,
Mhm.
and you think that I'm just such a servant, I have such a servant heart, all I do is like to give, right? And
Yeah.
so if we're not willing to be honest with ourselves about how subtle these things are, we
Mhm.
might think that the self-care is in that. Like, I
That's
can tell myself I'm taking care of myself, being a perfectionist.
that's right. That's
So it,
true.
it, it takes a lot of vulnerability to really confronting those things. A lot of times people don't know that they're self-sabotaging.
Mhm. That's good.
they
That's
really
true.
don't they really don't know. So I really appreciate you sharing those, because I think that you're bringing light to it just by even calling it out for what it is.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people that are perfectionists that I know, and like I said myself, and until we give a voice to it, or give a name to it, or whatever, sometimes
Mhm.
we don't know. I can remember specifically talking with a client who did not identify the behaviors as self-sabotaging until we talked through them, and then it was like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that that's what I was doing.
Wow.
And so that's why self-care is important as well, because it's going to give you an opposite benefit to the
Mhm.
benefit what you were getting from the behaviors that are not the healthiest, right?
That's true. That's
It's going to increase your relationships and your connections. It's going to help you to feel better about yourself. And that alone will help you to see those other behaviors that you said, for what they really are, because they do serve a purpose. And
mhm.
so a lot of times it's recognizing that whether we are engaging in self-care or we're engaging in self-neglect, it all serves a purpose. And because and when I say purpose, let me preface it by saying it's all benefiting us in some way. Let me say
Mm,
it like that.
okay.
And because we're getting benefit out of it, it makes it even more likely that it's something where it's going to be our go-to because it's
Mhm.
benefiting us in some way. One of the
Mhm.
things that you said earlier is that you used the word needs when we were talking about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, we
Mhm.
all have needs,
Mhm.
and we are all striving each and every day to meet those needs. And
Right.
some people meet their needs in healthy ways, and some people meet their needs in unhealthy ways. And
That's
that's
right.
all of us, right?
That's right.
We
All
have
of us.
all engaged in healthy ways to meet our needs, and we have all
Mhm.
engaged in unhealthy ways to meet our needs. And
Mhm.
so it's also recognizing that you have the propensity, you, me, us have the propensity to meet our needs in unhealthy ways. And we're simply saying, hey, what are some healthy ways that we can meet our needs so that we don't have to resort to the unhealthy ways? Because
That's right.
essentially that need is going to get met.
One way or
You
the
have
other.
to you have to decide how you're going to meet it.
That's good. That's really good. I do have a few benefits of self-care before we get ready to prepare to depart and leave.
Yes, ma'am.
So a few benefits of self-care that I found, it says it improves, again, it improves resilience. I'm saying it again. It increases your worthiness. It improves your feelings of well-being. It benefits others around you. Think about it. When we're in a better place, guess what? Other
Mhm.
people benefit that. That makes me think of, the scripture where Jesus says we're a light on the hill because we're shining light. So think about it. When
Mhm.
we're taking care of ourselves, it's going to exude. We're going to, people going to see it in us.
Yeah.
Um, Ooh, you in a better place. How you doing? What you been doing to um
That's good.
increases self-confidence. That's good. Self-care increases your confidence. That's great. It reduces stress and anxiety. Just think about just taking a little time, and even in the areas, she said vocational, she said social self-care, she said educate intellectual self-care, she said spiritual self-care. I mean,
Mhm.
those are different areas you can, go into to
Right.
improve. It says improves your sleep quality and digestion. Okay, y'all.
Okay. Mhm.
Self-care is better than Pepto. Self-care is better than Maalox.
That's a good way to say that.
I'm just saying, okay, and it's cheaper
Mhm. Mhm.
without the side effects. I like
Right.
that. It's only good side effects.
Right.
Okay. It says it improves your focus. So if you're struggling with
Mhm.
focusing on things, and there's times when and how many think about when you say I gotta refocus. Yeah, we
Mhm.
probably need to take some time to take care of ourselves. All
Mhm.
right. It says it boosts your immune system. Wow, that's powerful. And it boosts the immune system. And it said it increases productivity. We think we're tired all the time, but it's saying that if we take some time to do some self-care, we may have more energy. We may be able to
Right.
accomplish more things.
Mhm.
Those are my few things about, let me see. And I think my last thing that I wanted to say is that ultimately is that self-care is important. Even if you are a believer, you can be a believer and take care of yourself. You can be a believer and love yourself. Loving yourself is in line with what the word of God says. Love your neighbor as thyself. He said he gave you the example of how to love your neighbor. The example is you love them how you love you. And so you have to
Mhm.
ask yourself, am I loving myself? How can I love my neighbor? Am I loving my neighbor? Am I not loving my neighbor? Let
Mhm.
me check myself. That's my
Oh, I
little
love that. I love that. That's some good stuff. Yeah, I like the scripture that you used. Created us in Christ Jesus, and it says for good works.
mhm. Yeah.
This is all good works. What you're talking
Mhm.
about, what we're talking about, self
Mhm.
care, self love. It's all a good work, and it's for the benefit of everybody.
That's
And I
right.
love that you tied that in. So, what are some things we can do? Um, Go ahead. Were you gonna say
Oh, no,
something?
I was just gonna say, in addition, we talked about the multi-billion-dollar industry. What we're talking about is do the self-care, the internal work first. Sit back, reflect, ask yourself, do is it true I can't stand nobody?
Mm.
Well, why don't I can't stand nobody? Is it because I can't stand myself?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Am
Mm-hmm.
I loving myself so that I can love my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Um I would say that. I would also say that, so start on doing those internal workings. I
Yeah.
would then say, if you need to if you're struggling with self-care, reach out to a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Have them talk you through or investigate those different areas. Take one at a time. A lot of times we feel like it's overwhelming when we see a bunch of things. And so it causes us not to start with anything. Take
That's
one
good.
thing and
Yep.
start with one if it's vocational. I even like the vocational one, I was beginning to struggle, but when she began to talk about how she invests in her staff, I that's something I found that I get reinvigorated when I'm onboarding my staff member or when I'm, giving them some tools of the trade, on what they can
Mm-hmm.
use to be successful. So absolutely. So look in those different areas and say like, okay, let me at least do one out of this area and just
Mm-hmm.
build upon it. So we definitely want to do those things
Right.
internally first. My other suggestion, of course, would be, of course, the other things like, manicures, pedicures,
Yes.
facials, massages. Go get a
Mm-hmm.
massage with your BFF. Go get a massage with your husband. Go get a massage. I've gone and had massages with my daughters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's those are good things for self care as far as where you're going to be investing into the
Absolutely.
the rich industry, but they're still good for you, but
Right.
it'll be more when you have done some of the inside
Mm-hmm.
self-care.
Mm-hmm.
That's just gonna be the icing on the cake. That's gonna be like, "Whoo, I feel
Absolutely.
good
Mm-hmm.
down in my soul." No, I feel good.
It is well with my soul.
Yeah, I like that. It is well with my that's good.
And
That
it
is good.
should be things that you enjoy. You know what I'm
Mhm,
saying? Like
mhm.
anytime you are investing in yourself, invest in yourself in the areas of things that you enjoy.
That's good.
I went and got my feet done yesterday and
Come
I
on now.
enjoyed it. And then I went to go see a movie because I like movies. But
Mhm.
ultimately, it should be something that we enjoy. And if you find yourself slipping back into old behaviors, because that happens,
Mhm.
you don't stop. You know, you reevaluate your goal, and
Mhm.
maybe you
I
set
like
some
that.
different steps. Maybe you set some different action steps towards achieving your goal, but you don't stop.
That's good.
This is vitally, vitally important. It's about as important as breathing.
That's
And so we know that if we all of a sudden stop breathing, it's not going to be good for any of us. So we have to look at self care the same way, that it is our lifeline. But
right.
it should be enjoyable, and it should be things that we would that we find some satisfaction in.
That's good. That's good. You got a good one for us?
Yes, I do. I do
Let me
indeed.
get
I'm
it
gonna
right one day. It's
a
go,
good one,
go
go
do.
do. Good
Good
one,
one,
go
go
do.
do.
Yes.
Okay.
So you had brought up getting therapy, and I want to touch on that with this good one, go do. So the Greek word for healing is therapeuo, and it is given in the New Testament 48 times, and it's
Wow.
where we get the word therapy.
Mm.
It's called therapeuo. And
That's
basically, what it speaks to is the process of healing. So therapy is one of those things that allows for a process of healing. And I enjoy being a therapist. I enjoy being a part of people's process of healing. But I
mhm,
know that I'm not the only part of that process.
mhm.
So part of the reason why I talk to them about this stuff is because they can do it outside of therapy. And it's
Mm.
the stuff that people engage in outside of therapy. Although I think therapy is incredible and I would encourage anybody to do it, it's all the things that you do outside of therapy that makes all the difference in the world.
That's good.
And so the more I can give people things that they can do when they're not sitting in front of me, is the more I feel like I've contributed to their healing journey.
Love it.
And I value that. Let me just say that our brains are neuroplastic. And
Mhm.
what that means is that it will reorganize our structure, our function, and the connections that happen in our brain after an injury. So, even the most traumatic brain injury that a person can experience, they
Mhm.
can regain function because their brain is neuroplastic. The same way that we heal when we get a cut, or our cells regenerate. God has created us with this incredible ability to heal, to always be well. It is
Mm,
well with our souls. And we need to understand that whatever comes against us, He's created a way for us to be healed.
I love it. Oh, that is so beautiful. Well, friends, this has been a great journey on self-care. You got your good one for today.
You got
And
your
what we
nuggets,
got your nugget
Regina's,
for
Regina's
today.
nuggets.
You got your nugget for today. And so, again, we thank you for coming and hanging out with us today to talk about self care part two. And
Mhm.
again, I anticipate we will be talking about self care continuously because, we have to do that so that we can
Mhm.
be whole and so that we can go out there and help others to be whole. That's what's really important. We're supposed to
Yes.
be doing this for not just for ourselves, but to do it for others. But with that being said, you know what we are. We are righteous minds where we are tending
Tender
the mind
mind and
and
nurture.
nurturing the soul. Talk to everyone later. See you
Thank
in a
you.
couple weeks.
Bye bye.